The Swelling Season by Josh Reynolds. Oily rain wept down across the city of Grint. It sheeted across the lumpen rooftops, eddying in crepuscular gutters before cascading down into the muddy streets below. Ilsa crouched in the lee of a tottering chimney, with a sodden hood pulled low over her face. Below her, the city slept, dreaming sad, fitful dreams. A flock of smog jays swooped by overhead, shrieking raucously in the rain. Ilsa ignored their gibbering and reached into her overcoat, feeling for the last fibrous strands of tuber stowed in her holey pockets. Gnawing and suckling at the tough strands of tuber, she leaned against the precarious stacked bricks of the chimney and watched the marsh mist spill through the tangled glut of narrow streets below. Grint was a pimple on the earth, rising higher with every passing decade. The mud beneath its ancient and crumbling foundations was ever greedy, forcing the citizenry to build up as well as out, as older structures were drawn deep into the mire of cyst. Worse, they were squeezed between the mire and the murk, for even as the mud lapped at the foundations, the rain rotted the roofs, forcing the folks of Grint into a war of attrition against the very land they called home. Despite this, they were content. The root had been good to Grint, for all that it sought to devour them. Things might be miserable, but they had always been miserable. In a way, it was a comfort. Absently, Ilsa tapped her fingers against the rusty set of pruning shears that hung from around her neck. They were as sharp as any blade. They had to be, to prune the thick growths that spilled across the highest reaches of the city. Her eyes strayed out across the myriad convolutions of the rooftops as she popped another strand of tuber into her mouth. From above, Grint resembled a squelchy expanse of marshland, its softly palpitating surface broken only by the occasional defiant turret or smoke-belching chimney. Bunches of tangled, darkly swollen root latticed across the peaks and gutters, making it seem as if the city were all of one piece. The roof root was how she made her precarious living, or rather the nubbly buds thereof. Chewing them could clear the head of malodors, and brewing them for drink could rinse the gut clean, something the folk of Grint were ever in need of, and would pay gladly to get, especially this time of year, when the rain fell for days on end, making everything smell of piss and rot. The folk of Grint knew it as the swelling season, when the churning mud rose and the roof roots became swollen and plump. It was the best time to harvest the buds, when they were at their most potent. It was also the most dangerous. Between the rain and the surging mud, the city often shook like an old man affected with palsy. One wrong step, and her harvesting days would be done. She paused and looked down at her empty fingers. She'd eaten the last of her root without noticing. The pangs began almost at once, and she gripped her stomach. Living up here, she'd taken to supplementing her sparse meals with slices of stem and stollen, unwise perhaps, given that she now couldn't seem to go more than a day without tasting it, unless she wished to endure excruciating pain. Folk ate the root, and the root ate the folk. That was the way of it. The thought of it made her mouth water, and she rose to her feet, snagging her lantern as she did so. It was time to harvest. Snicking her shears, she made her way along the ridge of the roof, sniffing the air for the sickly sweet scent of the blooming buds. When she caught a whiff of the aroma, she eagerly scuttled towards a swollen twist of taproot emerging from within a dormant chimney. Her shears snick-snacked and clipped loose a fleshy nodule. She held it up, studying her prize in the dim, wet light of her lantern. It resembled the bulb of a particularly repellent parsnip, and leaked a pus-like juice when she gave it a gentle squeeze. Eagerly, she cut into it, exposing what looked to be a lump of human hair and teeth. A ripe one. She nibbled it as she got to work on the rest. She'd harvested almost a pocketful of the warty buds when she heard the tromp of many feet heading north. Curious now, she crawled as close as she dared to the edge of the roof and peered down to get a look at whoever was causing such a racket. A horde of people marched through the boggy city square, dispersing the fog and throwing up a chaotic scramble of shadows across the broken walls of Grint. Those villagers, unlucky enough to be out and about, flattened themselves against any available surface, hoping to avoid the notice of the newcomers. Ilse didn't blame them. The marchers were an unruly and scabrous lot, clad in filth-caked clothing and rusted armour. They made for an unsettling sight. Many were hunched and broken of form. Some limped along, dragging twisted limbs behind them. A steady grumbling rose from their ranks, blotting out the normal sounds of the city at night. Some hauled rickety carts behind them, and twitching bodies lay in the backs of some of these conveyances, where they endured the attentions of beak-masked quacks. Ilse watched the procession in wide-eyed awe. She'd seen regiments before, of course, but only ever at a distance, marching along the old marsh road. Up close, they seemed altogether less inspiring, disappointing even. In fact, there were a great many stained bandages, broken weapons, and crumpled shakos among the rank and file. They huddled against one another, as if seeking comfort in the presence of their fellows. Ilse recognized the signs easily enough. The pubs were full of beaten men most nights. She frowned. There'd been a rumbling and groaning somewhere south of the city the night before. A battle, then, and these were the losers. They'd likely come looking for shelter, something they'd find precious little of in Grint. The city barely tolerated its own inhabitants. Yet even as the thought crossed her mind, her nose detected a strange miasma, not altogether displeasing, rising from their ranks. Ilse's nostrils twitched as she detected the pungency of unfamiliar roots, and she began to salivate. She thrust the remainder of the bud she'd been eating into her mouth and chewed noisily as she scampered along a parallel course to the newcomers. It did little to satiate her hunger. It was said that regiments often brought with them strange roots and cuttings, for they were as much pilgrims as soldiers. Her stomach twisted with desire at the thought of foreign food. Maybe they'd be willing to part with some, in trade. Or better yet, she could just take it. They'd never miss a morsel or two missing, surely. She licked her lips at the thought. The smell grew stronger the longer she followed them. The macabre procession came to a halt in front of the taproot, Grint's only inn. One of the men at the front banged on the shutters with a club, rousing the proprietor and his family. "Open up! Open up in the name of old Father Mandrake!" he bellowed at the top of his lungs. The proprietor, fat, old Tagazi, with his fibrous beard and warty nodules, hurriedly wrenched open the doors, letting out a spill of warm light. He froze at the sight of what awaited him. From within the ranks of the procession, a strange figure hopped forward. A squat, toad-like mutant, clad in what looked like a befouled rabbit costume, adorned with epaulets and ribbons of merit. A filthy wig decorated the creature's sloped skull, and he adjusted it as he gazed up at Tagazi in apparent bonhomie. "We require rooms, good innkeeper," the mutant croaked. "And libations. I require your finest bucket of squench, and a bowl of squeezings, if such a delicacy is to be had in this burg." "My lord, I... Tagazi began in his usual obsequious fashion. One of the toad's companions thumped him in his belly and shoved him back inside. The toad wobbled in after. "Many thanks, kind publican," he burbled. "Your generosity does you much credit." He turned. "Get the toff inside," he said, as several men carefully extracted a fetal shape from one of the carts. As they jostled the shape, it gave out a piteous groan and raised a shaggy head. Ilsa tensed. For an instant, she'd thought the man, for it was a man, had looked right at her, and she felt a sudden squirming in her guts. The root bud in her mouth tasted like ashes, and she almost spit it out before thinking better of it. "More carefully than that, or I'll peel you like a potato," the mutant barked, as they brought the injured party inside. He closed the door behind them, plunging the street back into darkness. Ilsa wondered what was going on. A prisoner, perhaps, or an injured officer. The latter seemed more likely, given the fawning consideration they were showing. The rest of the regiment seemed content to hunker down in the street, or roust the local shopkeepers from shelter. Doors were thumped and shutters rattled as the newcomers burst into whatever homes were not sufficiently secured. Belatedly, Ilse recalled another tradition of the swelling season. It was this time of year that the regiments came hunting for recruits. They rarely stopped at Grint, but this lot seemed to have had little choice. If they'd recently been handed a defeat, they might need replacements for their casualties. She hunched low, hoping to avoid notice. She had little inclination to join a regiment. Bud harvesting was dangerous enough. At the thought, she sniffed the air again. The miasma, the sweet stench, had risen most strongly from whomever had been carried inside, and it had vanished with them. The inn only had a few rooms worth the name, and all of them overlooked the alley. The injured man was certain to be in one of them. She crept across the taproot's twisty, squelching roof towards the alley, imagining what it would taste like. Would it be sweet or bitter? Salty or sour? She wanted to know. Needed to know. Despite the burgeoning need, she hesitated, wondering at her own foolhardiness. Was a taste of some strange root really worth the risk? Her stomach grumbled, and throwing caution to the wind, she clambered down towards the first window. The descent was tricky, thanks to the falling rain, but she was able to reach the shutters without losing her grip. She paused, hanging from subsidence-shifted stones like an overgrown, if somewhat malnourished, newt. Despite the falling rain, she could hear voices within. As she'd hoped, they'd taken the uppermost room. It was the best in the inn, often reserved for travellers of substance. Not that there were many of those this time of year. She leaned close, listening, praying they would leave sooner rather than later. "We should go, now," the voice grumbled. "Scarper while we've got the chance." "And what about him, then?" another voice replied. "He's not going anywhere with his belly all burst open like that. Are we just to leave him?" "Yes," said the first voice. "That's exactly what we should do. Leave the whole bloody lot of them. Only slow us down, the laggards." "If Todd heard you speaking like that, he'd pull your weaselly black guts out and wear them like a scarf," said the second voice. "Todd ain't here, is he? He's downstairs, singing about victories he was never part of. Damn sellsword. He's not one of us, no matter how much he licks the captain's boots. Soon as the money runs out, he'll be back off to his mum with the regimental rhizomes. We already ate all those." "And he's the one who got us out and away from those cannibal bastards," the first voice interrupted. "Only because he ran away and the rest of us followed." A disgusted sigh. "Anyway, we didn't get away, we just delayed the inevitable. They'll be here come first light, if not earlier. We only whet their appetites. That's why we need to go. Let Todd fight them, if he's spoiling for it." There was a wheeze and a creak of wood, as if someone were sitting up in bed. "Are you so fearful, then, Barnaby?" The new voice was a harsh rasp. "Captain, I thought you were sleeping," the first voice began. "We go nowhere," the harsh voice interjected. "Not while I'm in charge. Not while I hold the holy root." A rattling cough followed this declaration, and a creak of hinges. There was a thin scream, the sort a small animal might make, and then silence. Curses and groans followed, then the sound of something metal snapping shut. The harsh voice spoke again. "We will not leave until the regiment is once more at full strength, until every fallen body is replaced. Only then shall we march." A chorus of muttered agreements greeted this statement. "Good," the harsh voice said. "Leave me, and let there be no more cowardly talk." Ilsa heard the sound of boots on the creaking floorboards, and the groan of someone in pain. Then silence. She waited, perched on the narrow sill, gnawing absently on a root bud. When she was certain that whoever was in the room was asleep, she pried the shutters open with her shears. The wood was soft with damp, and made little sound save a tiny squealing. A candle burned next to the bed, painting the room with a dull, hazy glow. There was little in the room save a rough wooden bed, a reeking chamber pot, and a single chair next to the window. The door was closed. Dripping with rainwater, she climbed in. She sniffed the air, and the same sweet stink greeted her. It was stronger here, almost cloying in the confines of the room. It drew her in. She crept towards the bed, wondering how she was going to find it. All thought of caution was wiped away when she spied the locket draped across the pillow. It was a small thing, tarnished and dented. She used the tip of her shears to lift it, and saw that the chain was still around the sleeper's scrawny neck. By the light of the candle, she examined the man. Older, face mostly hidden in a thicket of hair and finely greased mustachios. Thin nodules of pallid matter emerged from the thick hair and studded his cheeks, chin, and hands, a sure sign of the rooty growths. The man was still clothed in a malodorous uniform, save for his mossy officer's coat, which lay in a heap on the floor beside a dented helm with a beaked visor. A steamy, ripe odour rose from his belly, which was stained a dark red and seemed altogether the wrong shape. As Ilsa watched, something moved within, and the sleeping man gave a faint groan of protest. Ilsa swallowed the last of her root bud and turned her attentions to the locket. Ilsa gave an experimental tug, but the locket wasn't going anywhere. She bit her lip and opened the shears, ready to cut through the rusted chain. The smell of whatever was in the locket was driving her mad. She wanted it, needed it. The shears bit into the metal with a sound that set her teeth to itching. It took 2 bites to sever the links, but sever it she did. She scooped up the locket with trembling hands and pried it open. Inside, a twist of root the size of her pinky. In the wavering light of the candle, she thought it was almost man-shaped. It turned its head to look at her, and gave a thin, shrill scream. Startled, Ilse stumbled over the helmet, sending it clattering across the floor. She heard the telltale squelch of a sabre being drawn from a damp sheath, and saw the dull gleam of rusted metal arcing towards her at an awkward, if deadly, angle. The room's occupant had awoken, and he was not best pleased.
"Thief!"
Ilse ducked aside as the sword bit deep into the bedpost, and scrambled for the window. The root in the locket continued to wail, even after she'd snapped it shut. She paid little attention to it, however. Her only thought was to escape with her prize. But even as she reached the window, a brambly paw fell upon her coat and wrenched her backwards.
"Get back here!"
the locket's owner rasped. Ilse went for her shears, but she was flung to the floor, and they clattered from her grip. The root in the locket ceased its wailing, as if shocked by the suddenness of it all. The door burst inward. She was surrounded in moments, her world reduced to a ring of blades and mallets. Twisted faces glared at her from behind these implements. "Assassin!" one of them croaked. She recognized the toad-like mutant in his filthy rabbit costume, but armed this time with a tarnished pistol. I was just collecting root buds," Ilse stammered. She cursed her idiot greed. She glanced at the window, but knew she wouldn't make it. "Murderer," another growled. "He tried to kill Captain Snurl." "I didn't," Ilse protested. "We all saw it." He bared brown teeth and prodded Ilse in the kidney with the bent tip of a rusted bayonet. Ilse winced.
"Not a murderer,
just a thief." This from the room's occupant, Snurl. He stood on unsteady legs, with one hand pressed to his belly. He took the locket from Ilse's unresisting hands.
"And not a very good thief, either."
He coughed, and the others flinched. I wasn't." Ilse's eyes followed the locket. "It just smelled so good." Snurl staggered.
"Todd, help me, please."
The mutant hurried over and helped the injured man to the bed. The others shifted uncomfortably, looking as if they wished they were anywhere else. "The worthless scrapings of this city obviously sent her to kill the captain," the one with the brown teeth said, "probably unhappy with how many of their folk we're pressing into service. We should make an example of her, teach them not to raise a hand to their betters." He gave a malicious grin. "Peel her like a parsnip, says I." "No, let's string her up," the other burbled, thumping his mallet into Ilse's stomach with playful glee. He scratched at the root-like hairs that decorated his almost non-existent chin. "Let her dance outside the window." The one with the brown teeth shrugged. "Fine by me. Fetch some rope and let's be done with it."
"No,"
Snurl rasped. "But my lord, surely," the one with the growths on his chin began.
"Was I not speaking clearly? Was I not speaking clearly, Aloysius?"
Von Snurl sat up in the bed, his malformed features arranged in an expression of stern reproach. He coughed again, and Ilse saw that the wound in his belly was leaking, staining everything a dark hue.
"The root drew her here. Else why would she come in at all?"
"She's a thief, obviously," the one with the brown teeth snarled. "Look at her."
"I am, Barnaby. Are you?"
Snurl countered.
"She is practically salivating. She smelled the root from outside the room. That tells me all I need to know."
"You are badly hurt, my lord," Barnaby pressed, eyes narrowed. "Your faculties are no doubt rattled by your narrow escape. You cannot mean what I think you mean." Ilse looked back and forth between them, at a loss.
And if I do, Barnaby, Snell said, in a low voice.
She's not fit. She's barely a scrap of peeling, not worth chewing. It should be one of us. Not Todd, obviously. Barnaby looked at the mutant. No offence. None taken, Todd said, in a tone that indicated otherwise.
You wish to take up my baton, then, Barnaby?
Snurl indicated his sabre hanging from the bedpost.
Here it is. Come and have it.
Barnaby glanced at Aloysius, who shook his head rapidly. Barnaby glowered at his fellow officer and spat. Coward! He took a step towards the bed. Snurl lifted the locket and popped it open. The rootling within stretched itself like a bestirred cat and gave a shrill yowl that set Barnaby and the others to clutching their heads and cursing in obvious pain. All save Ilsa. For her, the sound was piercing, but not painful. No, rather it was beautiful. Unconsciously, she reached towards the locket, and Snurl snapped it shut. The singing ceased. Barnaby and Aloysius stared at her in confusion and loathing. "What?" Barnaby began.
As I said,
Snurl intoned.
She hears the song of old Father Mandrake, the same as me.
He looked down at his belly, and a sad smile contorted his ugly features. He pressed a hand to his wound, and Ilsa thought she saw the man's shirt twitch, as if something beneath it were growing agitated.
Only one who can listen without fear is fit to bear the mandrake. Only one who hears its song is fit to taste it.
Snurl sat suddenly, as if weary.
Todd,
he coughed. Todd cleared his throat, a horrible sound. He gestured to the door. Out, the pair of you. Our innkeeper has several stout sons. Mayhap they might wish to join a regiment as storied as this one, eh? And who are you to order us about, you squamous croaker? Barnaby growled, glaring down at the mutant. Todd cocked his pistol with purposeful deliberateness. Barnaby blinked and glanced down at his bayonet, and then back at the pistol. Oh, he added hurriedly. My mistake. He and Aloysius crept out, with much muttering and baleful looks. Todd closed the door and waited attentively. Ilsa looked at the mutant and then at his master, or rather, at what his master held. Though the locket was closed, she imagined she could hear snatches of the mandrake's song. She wiped her mouth absently.
What is your name, girl?
Snurl asked. Ilsa, what happened to you? Ilsa gestured.
Injured. In battle. It happens. I do not think you care about me, however.
Snurl let the locket swing. Ilsa watched it, unable to look away.
Do you wish to join the regiment, Ilsa? Our ranks are much depleted, and we could use you.
Ilsa trembled. I'm not a soldier.
Neither was I, once. I grubbed in the mud until I heard the song of the mandrake, until I smelled its sweet smell, and learned the joy of the eternal march.
The march?
The route, child. It commands us to march. Where we march, the soil is tilled and watered. Where we die, it is fertilized. Where the regiment goes, so too does the root. We carry it in us, and it in turn fills our bellies and our hearts. The root bids us march, and so we march.
Snurl smiled.
What do you do, girl?
I harvest roof buds. Ilsa gestured to her shears, still laying where they'd fallen. She reached into her pocket for one, but her fumbling yielded nothing. She'd eaten them all. She licked her lips, stomach knotting unpleasantly.
No roof bud is as sweet as old Father Mandrake, I warrant,
Snarl intoned, lifting the locket.
The father root, the mother root, the blessed cutting from which all others come. It calls to you, don't it?
He fixed Ilsa with a calculating eye.
Ah, it does. I see the hunger in your eyes. A holy hunger.
He heaved himself up, panting. His bandages had leaked, staining his waistcoat and breeches. Ilsa licked her lips. Just a bite, she murmured. Just a nibble. She rubbed her stomach. Just a bit to ease the cramps, please. Snarl gave a wheezing laugh.
It's not for the nibbling, lass, but the swallowing whole. The test is in whether you choke on it.
His hand trembled, and the locket swayed. Ilsa followed it with her eyes. She could hear the perfect tuber shape within crooning her name, inviting her to take a bite of its flesh. Ilsa reached out for it, and Snarl jerked it back out of reach. She froze as Todd raised his pistol. "Not for the taking," he croaked, not unkindly.
Todd's right. 'Tis not for the taking, but the giving. Shall I give it to you, Ilsa?
Snarl's eyes gleamed with an unhealthy light.
Shall I let you taste the mandrake?
Ilsa fumbled for the right words. She was not used to talking not for any length of time. Her tongue felt thick, and her mouth was full of saliva. She swallowed and said, "Yes. Oh, yes, please." Snarl sighed and laid back.
Very well.
His gaze flicked to Todd, and he indicated his sword.
Take that, and wait outside. See that no one enters.
Todd bobbed on his splayed feet, rabbit ears flopping. "Aye, Captain." He hefted the sabre, but paused at the door. The bulbous yellow eyes gazed at Ilsa with what she thought might be pity. Then the mutant was outside and closing the door behind him, cutting off the shouted inquiries of the toadies on the stairs. Snarl caught his expression and chuckled.
Fear not. It will not harm you, whatever happens. The root has chosen you, and none may gainsay old Father Mandrake, not if they are wise.
With palsied fingers, he cracked open the locket, exposing the tiny man-like shape within. It trilled and clutched at his fingertips in a grotesque parody of affection. My predecessor called himself Inquisitor. I, having no holy pretensions, named myself Captain. If you survive, you may title yourself as best suits you. Old Father Mandrake crawled onto von Snarl's palm and stood erect, a minuscule colossus reeking sweetly, oh, so sweetly. Ilsa came forward hesitantly, but eagerly none the less. She reached out, and the root did not resist as she took it in her hand and popped it into her mouth with a joyful groan. She felt it twitch and writhe as she chewed, and heard its thin cries. Was that pain? Ecstasy? She could not say. She knew only that it was still moving as it slid down her throat. A moment later, the pain hit. Or was it pleasure? It was excruciating regardless, a sudden sharpness stabbing into every nerve at once. She groaned and fell to her knees. Snarl was on his feet, watching.
The pain is good,
he wheezed.
It is the root of strength. Grip it, grasp it, uproot it, claim it as you must claim your captaincy. The regiment must have a toff. It must have fodder and chaff. Like the root, the regiment must grow and march, else it will wither and be lost to the mud.
The world beat at Ilsa's ears like thunder. She fell forward, her face bouncing painfully off of the floor. Everything hurt. It felt like a hot coal was twisting in her bowels. She rolled over and tore at her belly with numb fingers. Her heels drummed on the floor as she squeezed her eyes shut. Images flooded her mind. She saw the snap of a firing line, hurling leaden death at the approaching enemy. She heard the rattle of drums and the splash of boots in the mud. She felt the questing roots beneath the mud, clutching at her ankles, trying to drag her down. She smelled smoke and rot and blood and other indescribable things. 100 images, 100 battles, 100 lifetimes slammed into her one after the next. She saw immense, godlike shapes staggering through a pestilent mist, and heard the croaking of the mire hogs. She felt the breeze of shot and the shock of her blade meeting that of her opponent. Her thoughts cracked beneath the weight of what she was being shown, and the shards of her were gathered up and jostled about by what was growing within her. She felt herself strung like a garland upon a great pallid root that nestled in her mind and soul. More images, more visions of what had been or what was yet to be. It all blurred into the same, as steady as the seasons, death and rebirth. Where did she end and the root begin? Ilsa had no answer, but she no longer desired one. She was the root, and the root was her. That was enough. Her eyes sprang open. The room was dark. The candle had gone out at some point. Snurl lay cold and flaccid on the bed. Having seen out his last duty, the old officer had taken his final breath. Ilsa rose shakily to her feet. Vomit stained her chest and face, but her stomach no longer heaved. Her bowels no longer burned. She touched her stomach and heard a soft sound in her mind's ear, a trill of contentment, and a command as old Father Mandrake told her what to do next. She retrieved her shears and bent over Snurl's body. A snick and a snack, and then she was rooting through the red soil of Snurl's body for what she knew she would find. What she must find. She could not be the keeper of the holy root without a root to keep. Thankfully, it was not difficult to locate. She extracted the small, squirming shape so like that which she had devoured, and yet somehow different. Not old Father Mandrake this, but a young rootling, newly scrounged and stinking of the death that had birthed it. Young Mother Mandrake. It squalled piteously as she stuffed it into the locket, its voice almost a shrill echo of Snurl's own, though softer and more feminine. It would learn in time as she would learn, and when the day came that she was no longer fit for purpose, it would be devoured, and that which now grew within her would be consigned to the locket in its turn, to sing for whoever came after. Father, Mother, it made no difference. They were all part of an unbroken root, stretching through uncounted days, and now she was part of it. She dressed herself in Snurl's clothes. They were finer than anything she'd ever owned before, despite the smell. Somehow they fit her, though she'd been certain the dead man was taller. She hesitated before she put on the helmet, however. Some instinct warned her that to do so would be a somehow irrevocable choice. The helmet was rusty and sharp in places, the visor gummed shut with a treacle-like smear of something, the plumes that had once decorated its top now nothing more than pallid veins that flopped like the stalk of some silvery tuber. Worse, it stank of a dying man's last breath. A shrinking part of her wanted to toss it aside. In her gut, the mandrake gave a trill of encouragement. Ilsa pulled the helmet on. It fit perfectly. The weight of it settled onto her, and she tightened the myriad straps and buckles that would hold it in place as easily as if she had done it 100 times before. When she'd finished, she stared down at the red ruin on the bed. When the regiment departed, it would likely be consigned to the mulch pile the innkeeper kept out back. Folk ate the root, and the root ate the folk. She thought Snurl would approve. Ilsa hauled open the door and stepped out into the corridor. The gathered toadies started as if they'd seen a ghost. "My lord," Barnaby rasped, gaping up at her. His rusty bayonet hung forgotten in his hand. He paused, and then corrected himself. "My lady?" "Yes," Ilsa said. "I am." Todd gave a bellicose whoop and hopped forward, nearly tripping over his feet. He lifted the sabre in its crumbling sheath. Ilsa took the weapon, and the fibrous matter of the hilt entwined about her fingers with something that might have been curiosity or invitation. She welcomed it and belted the blade to her hip. Barnaby and Aloysius looked at one another and then bowed. "You're looking better, my lady," Barnaby simpered. "Puffy as a mushroom." "Puffier," Aloysius added in a servile tone. Without a word, Ilsa made her way downstairs and out into the muddy city square. Her new toadies, and Todd, stumbled after him, dazed and bemused. Men and women waited in bedraggled ranks, their worm-riddled muskets laid across their shoulders. They set up a brittle cheer as they caught sight of her. If they noticed any difference in their toff, they gave no sign. Something compelled her to raise the locket high, and the cheering swelled to raucous heights. Several soldiers, unable to contain themselves, broke into an impromptu jig. "Orders, my lady?" Todd croaked at her elbow. Ilsa took in the crumbling roofs of Grint one last time, and squared her shoulders. The rootling inside the locket was singing softly. She smiled. "We march."